Okay, it's 3 after 1. I'd like to get us started. My name is Skip Swenson. I'm the VP of Policy and Programming here at Forterra. If it comes up, I use he, him pronouns. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We really appreciate your interest today. At Forterra, our work is at the intersection of people and place. So even though we're meeting here virtually, each of us stands on the land of Indigenous peoples. And likely most of us are standing on the land of Coast Salish and Plateau peoples. So it's important for us to acknowledge and remember this as we talk about land use, and climate change here today. Today, I'm excited to be talking about something near and dear to me, which is Forterra's Evergreen carbon capture program, which has planted 6,000 trees in 2020 alone, helping address climate change here locally. It's something that we can all do. It's relatively easy to do so. I do want to note that this webinar is being recorded, so we can post it on our website later. That said, those of you who have joined, you're not going to be visible in the recording, and we're not going to share any of your personal information. This is just so we can share with more people that maybe couldn't join us today. I'd like now to have our panelists introduce themselves, and I'll start with you, Lindsay.
Great, thanks, Skip. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Hanna. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a Senior Director of Policy and Communities Programs here at Forterra. And I develop and implement programs and policies to support sustainable communities and natural resource lands throughout Washington. And I also direct our Evergreen carbon capture program.
Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Rasmussen. I am a Senior Marketing Coordinator at GOI Construction, which is a locally owned regional general contractor based out of Bellevue, Washington. And I joined GOI's Sustainability Committee shortly after being hired on, and that's when I learned about Forterra and the Evergreen Carbon Capture Program. And I've been organizing our company's annual tree planting events for the past 8 years.
Thank you. And I'll just say I'm particularly excited that GOI and Stephanie were able to participate today, just because it's one of the founding participants of our Evergreen Carbon Capture Program. And it's just wonderful to have Stephanie and her experience here. So for today, we're going to have 3 main segments in our time. First is we're going to take a quick poll, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. We're going to have a segment for panel discussion and some sort of predetermined questions. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A. And we're going to have lots of opportunity for you all to ask questions that you may have of our panelists. And you don't need to wait to ask your questions. We're going to be collecting those. If you look in Zoom, in the bottom of your window, there's a Q&A button. Please use that option and submit your questions at any time, and we will field those and curate them and get them moving along in that Q&A section. So all that said, starting with poll. The poll is going to be using a web service called Slido. So if you're able, we're going to ask everybody now to please open a browser and you navigate to slido.com. And if you look up on your screen on the left, you'll see slido.com, how it's spelled. Once you get to Slido, you'll be prompted for a code, and you want to enter ECC. Give everybody just a moment to get there. So once you get in, you're going to see, oh, perfect, some people are already figuring it out. You're going to see, we're wanting to know what you hope to learn today. And that will help us ask questions and answer questions based on what you're interested in. So no need to check just one. You can check multiple options if more than one apply. But we'll just give it another minute here. I think we've got about 200 participants, and we're quickly ratcheting up with 40 people participating thus far. So thank you to the early adopters. Okay, stabilizing. Looks like a lot of people are interested in the local option, and that's great because that's what we're here to talk about today. relatively evenly split between individuals and businesses, which is wonderful. We can speak to both of those. And yeah, land stewardship, calculating, yep, this is good, a nice mix. Let's give it maybe another 30 seconds. People are still putting in their responses, but I think we're getting a pretty good mix of interest here. Okay, I think 61 looks like the number. So I'll ask the panelists to just please commit some of this to memory, but a good mix of the locality piece and then also what people can do, what businesses can do. And then also how you calculate it, those that are interested already. So maybe we can navigate back to the slide deck. And I'll start us off with the panel discussion. And I'll start with just right at the get-go, got through a lot of what we saw in the poll. Why should we focus on local solutions to this global climate issue? And why should we do that now? And maybe Lindsay, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Skip. Well, I probably don't need to tell the people that are joined on this coffee chat that climate change is one of the most pressing issues facing us currently. I think given people's attendance here, they're probably already concerned and recognizing that action is urgently needed. People also seemed really interested in what local solutions people can take. And so there's obviously, people are placing emphasis on that local aspect. But just to talk a little bit more about the value I think local solutions bring to addressing this global problem are that investing in our own community really improves our region's resiliency against climate change. Creating local solutions also provides the opportunity for getting more people engaged and leads to a sort of cascade effect, I found. So for example, if companies are bringing employees out to plant trees through the Evergreen carbon capture program, for example, they're elevating this local dialogue around the issue of climate change and getting people thinking about what they can do for solutions. So people are exposed to more actions and start making more changes in their own personal lives. As for why now, I think people might not realize how quickly climate change is accelerating and that we really are at this critical tipping point. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their latest research indicates that we need to drop our global greenhouse gas emissions by half by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. And so we really don't have a lot of time to take action to fight climate change. And we're already seeing today so many impacts of climate change here locally with worsening wildfires every year, globally with average sea level rising, with retreating glaciers, with more intense weather patterns. I just heard on the news this morning we're at our 30th hurricane for the year, or 30th named storm for the year, which is record breaking. And so it just seems like we are seeing record-breaking weather patterns across the board. And so we really need to make changes now before regions of our planet become inhospitable to humans. And we're already seeing people leaving and climate migrants. And we need to think about how the Northwest potentially can create a refuge and how we can build the resiliency here of a region. And that's one great reason to start investing in local solutions.
And Stephanie, maybe the same question for you, which is this notion of local solutions, and especially you're coming from the perspective of business operating here. How much you answer that question?
Yeah, I think local solutions are really important because they provide this opportunity for people to have a personal connection to the issue. And I think that that's what kind of inspires action. So for GLY, one of our company values is being true to the Pacific Northwest. Our founders were actually from the Midwest and came to the Seattle area on a temporary work relocation, and they fell in love with the beauty of the area and decided to make the temporary relocation permanent. And so this area really is the heart and soul of our company, and our employees are bikers, hikers, backpackers, skiers, and we're raising our families here. And we understand our industry's responsibility in ensuring that we can raise future generations in an area where they can enjoy the land and water like we can today. The Evergreen carbon capture program allows us to provide those opportunities to make those personal connections to the issue. I think that working in local parks where our employees may have visited with their families in the past, or maybe they know people who visit the parks frequently, creates that personal connection, and they're able to think, what other habits can I change that can be part of the solution? And the more that we can layer those small changes, I think the bigger the impact to the global issue of climate change.
Wonderful, thank you. And so now we've mentioned Evergreen carbon capture a handful of times. Maybe Lindsay, you can tell us a bit more about it at this point.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So it is Forterra's one of our local solutions to fighting climate change. It's for companies and individuals that want to take responsibility for their carbon footprint and invest in healthy, resilient forested parks and natural areas for future generations. So we've partnered with over 50 companies in the past, it's about 8-9 years now. And most of our companies that we partner with, they see the value in local. That's why they're choosing this program. They want to be able to bring their employees and their families and their clients out to plant the trees themselves. And for us at Forterra, we're really excited about the program because it supports our organizational goals for restoring healthy forests and provides resources in the form of trees and funding for supporting restoration efforts through our Green Cities Partnership Program, our riparian restoration program, and supports restoration on Forterra-owned and managed lands. As a land trust, we own a fair amount of properties. Skip, you could probably provide that exact number. Is it 25,000 acres? Something like 17,000 acres, yeah. So we're starting to think about how we can use the program to support site restoration on those lands as well. And also we are able to provide trees to local stewardship organizations that are running their own restoration programs. We run a tree grant program through Evergreen Carbon Capture so that we can help those organizations achieve their restoration goals. So the program really has had pretty widespread impacts. We've planted trees at over 100 sites throughout the Puget Sound region. And those trees, we calculate, will sequester 5 tons of carbon over their lifetime. We use a calculator under the Climate Action Reserve's urban forest tree planting protocol. And we actually plant 3 times the amount of trees that we need to. So we take into account site variability and survivability factors. And we really strive to make the program as transparent as possible. And we track the trees, we put them on our online tree map, and we monitor them. So if they fall below survivability levels, we go out and replace them to bring that back up to that level of acceptable survivability. And so we really have established this rigorous protocol that we follow. And in addition to sequestering carbon, I think it's also worthwhile to mention that trees provide a host of other co-benefits. When we're talking about local solutions and local benefits, in addition to sequestering carbon, healthy forests provide all sorts of other value that are listed here on the PowerPoint. So we're improving air quality through restoring our forests. We're reducing soil erosion. We're reducing water pollution. This supports Puget Sound health. This supports salmon health, other aquatic species health. We're cooling cities and dampening noise pollution, sustaining stream flows, improving groundwater, and providing habitat for wildlife and also recreation for people, which improves our physical and mental health as well. So there's a bunch of different reasons why we want to plant more trees and maintain healthy forests. And I think I was going to have a couple extra minutes here to be able to share our tree map. If we could pull that up, that would be super. Thank you. So I just wanted to give an example of the breadth of the program. I mentioned we've planted at over 100 sites throughout Puget Sound region. And so that tree map, each little green flag represents a different site. And I mentioned the transparency is a really important element of our program. And so you can see on the left here, we have the planting sites, the participants, and the field partners. Those are our local stewardship organizations. They're all listed out so you can visit each of those flags and see the details. These are all the companies we're scrolling through now that have participated. And if we go all the way up to the top, we can click on GLY, since Stephanie's here with us today, and see that the map will sort to all of GLY's sites. And you can see these are all sites that GLY has planted. And if you click on the flag, it pops up with this information. And you can see in 2014, we planted a total of, scroll down a little, 175 trees, and you can see which companies those were assigned to. And then you can see which species were planted, the area that was planted. And if you zoom all the way in, you can even see the GIS coordinates of that area. So this makes it so that anyone can go back and visit their trees and see how they're growing years later. So it's a really great resource.
Thank you. So Stephanie, I said it at the top, I'm really happy you're here, in part because you've participated for a long time. Also, we saw in the pool, there's a lot of people that are interested in actions that businesses can take. And so I'm wondering if you could share your experience in the program and why that's important to GLY.
Yeah, so GLY was one of Forterra's founding partners in the Evergreen carbon capture program. And since then, launched in 2012. And since then, we've planted almost 1,200 trees. And it's always been a really well-attended event for our company and a really great way for our employees to come together and connect over a really clear objective and an objective with really clear benefits. So we calculated our main office's carbon footprint, and every year we plant 139 trees. And over the years, our involvement has changed a little bit. Last year in 2019, we worked with the Green Redmond Partnership to adopt Bear Creek Park in Redmond, and Forterra worked with us to get myself and a coworker trained as forest stewards, which allows us to host our own events at Bear Creek Park. And we try to get out there 4 to 5 times a year. And we were able to plant 2 years worth of our evergreen carbon capture trees at the park. And our additional work includes general maintenance, invasive species removal, lots of mulching, and like Lindsay kind of mentioned, it's been really a great way to tie into the tree program because we have been able to see our trees grow. And I think that it makes our employees feel pretty invested in that space and also the trees. Last year, the Bear Creek flooded quite a bit. So I know a lot of people were concerned about how the trees were going to hold up, but they're growing, and it's been really cool to see more of the lifetime of the trees versus just planting them once.
Thank you very much for that.
And I would love to just emphasize just how unique this partnership is with GLY in terms of, companies wanting to get involved with Forterra's work. Oftentimes we'll say, oh, well, you can, get involved with our Green Cities partnership, or you can offset your carbon footprint, or you can support this event that we're doing. And it's just really symbolic of just how you can really tie everything that we're doing together and really get involved in a deeper way. And, I love that it's just has come full circle to GLY becoming a forest steward and ECC supporting our Green Cities partnership, both through providing trees to those forest stewards and then also, getting to work with companies who are so invested they want to become forest stewards themselves. So I just want to highlight truly how unique the partnership is.
Yeah, and I think you were touching on this, but just to put a fine point on it too, it's also just really flexible in terms of how the level of involvement you'd like to have. It can be so much as offsetting your carbon footprint, and that's it. And then also all the way into, really owning it, which is kind of fun. So I've got one final question in this segment, at least, before we get to the Q&A. And it looks like some people are already pulling or using the Q&A button down at the bottom. If you tuned in late, that's how we're going to be fielding questions, is the Q&A button at bottom. You can submit your questions there. But my last question for you, and maybe Lindsay, I'll start off with you, but also Stephanie, I'm interested. Where can we find out, let's start with you, Lindsay. Where can we find out more about evergreen carbon capture beyond what you've said already?
Sure. There's a ton of information on our website, and I think that Paula just pulled up a link to the website. We talk about our carbon protocol. We have a link to the tree map, our annual report, and there's carbon calculators there where you can start to figure out your own carbon footprint of yourself, your household, or your business. And I'm also happy to chat with folks individually. So there's my email address, and I would welcome folks reaching out and asking any more questions that aren't answered here today.
And I see the slide stole my thunder, but Stephanie, how can we learn more about GLY?
You can learn more about GLY by visiting our website, which is up there, www.gly.com. And I encourage you to check out our blog, where we've recently posted a few things about our recent sustainability initiatives. And if anybody has additional questions, feel free to send me an email.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, now we're getting to the nitty gritty, the Q&A. And the first question that came up is for Lindsay. Are there opportunities to volunteer to plant for evergreen carbon capture?
Sure, that's a great question. So every year we invite our companies to come out and plant trees. It's not a required part of the program. It's total voluntary value add that we provide. Not all companies come out, but a fair number do. Beyond that, we do invite individuals to come out and plant trees in that same tree planting. We don't typically extend the volunteering beyond those that are participating in the program, because there's typically enough demand to plant the trees with the participants. But if you'd like to get involved with tree planting efforts, and for whatever reason you're not planning to offset your or your business's carbon footprint, there are other tree planting opportunities through other Forterra supported programs, for example, our Green Cities partnerships. So we can chat more about those. I also just caveat with COVID this year, it's seeming unlikely that we will be able to plant trees with volunteers in our tree planting season, which is in winter 2021. So we will be using professional crews, local stewardship organizations, and hopefully reverting back to volunteer support in the following year.
And just one note on that, we are monitoring the circumstances pretty closely, and we've got a lot of protocols in place for how we're safely working out in the field as staff. And we do have some plans for small volunteer program projects, but that's changing as new information comes in. So if you are interested, you can get in touch with Lindsay, and we can give you the most current information on what's possible. And you also mentioned Green Cities program, and just if you are interested in that, that's not the focus of this presentation, but you can go on our website at forterra.org and find more information on that program. So I'm going to move on to the next question that we've got, which is how long has this program been going on, Evergreen Carbon Capture? And we've hinted at it, but how long has GLY been involved?
Sure. So the program has an interesting genesis story. And so it started technically in 2010 when the band Pearl Jam approached us and wanted to offset the emissions from their world tour. And so we put together a custom carbon sequestration project for them at the time. Most of those trees were planted in Discovery Park. And we did that sort of partnership with Pearl Jam for 2 years, and then realized that there was more local demand and that the program had the opportunity to be expanded to other companies who wanted to participate. And so the first year we planted with Pearl Jam was 2011, and then the first year that we opened it up to other companies was 2012. The program has a little bit of a lag, so we recruit participants 1 year and then plant the following year. So it opened up to external partners in 2013, and we've been planting trees ever since.
And then Stephanie, in terms of GLY?
GLY was one of the founding members in 2012. I actually didn't know that backstory, Lindsay, but I was interning for Pearl Jam in 2010. So small world.
Layers of connections.
Yeah.
It's made to be. So the next question has to do with sort of the mechanics of the program. How's it funded? And then secondly, and this is for you, Lindsay, how do we incorporate long-term maintenance and replanting needs? How does that factored?
Sure. So the way we partner with companies is that we have a rate, a carbon rate. Every year we evaluate what the different carbon markets are doing and what our program expenses are. And so in 2020, for example, our rate was $7.50 per carbon ton. So the mechanics of the program is that a participant would calculate their carbon footprint. Let's say it's 10 tons of carbon are being emitted, and that's how much they want to offset. They would pay $7.50 per ton. So then we would take that money and put it towards the program operational costs. And so the program is really funded by the participants offsetting their carbon and providing that financial contribution. In terms of incorporating long-term maintenance and replanting needs, so all of our sites that are selected for Evergreen carbon capture planting sites, they need to be actively enrolled in restoration plans. And so that means that there's a commitment to long-term restoration at those sites. Whether or not Forterra is that stewarding organization, or whether or not I mentioned we also grant trees to other external partners as well, there is that commitment to the long-term restoration. For Forterra sites that we are own or managing or doing the restoration on, we are starting to invest more in the site prep to essentially plant trees in sites that need invasive species removed or need other preparation work in order to be able to plant the trees. And maintenance would be included in that beyond that. In terms of replanting needs, I mentioned we have a survivability protocol, and so we do replant when trees fall below that. Fortunately, we haven't had to replant too many trees, but when we do, that's built into our program costs as well.
The next question, Lindsay, is also for you. This is one we've gotten quite a bit over the years, and it's a good one, which is, what do we have in place to prevent carbon sequestration investments from companies becoming a justification to expand or expand production or pollute more?
Yeah, that's a great question. We certainly don't want to be supporting any greenwashing or be, providing a mechanism for companies, wanting to say, we're offsetting our carbon so we can emit more. What I have really found is that most companies that are participating in the program are committed to sustainability and are, part of being committed to sustainability is having a commitment to reducing your carbon emissions. In terms of making an impact for climate change, best practices are typically to first reduce your emissions as much as possible so they're never happening, and then to offset the rest. And I would say that most companies that we're working with are truly committed to sustainability and are approaching it through multiple prongs. It's not just the carbon offsetting. In terms of what we actually have in place, we have recommended talking points. We ask companies to be transparent in terms of what they're offsetting. So if they're not offsetting their full footprint, please don't go out saying you're carbon neutral. And so, we have those sorts of guidelines and talking points, but essentially we're not operating in a regulatory environment. There's no cap and trade program in place in our state, in our country. So everything's voluntary. And so as long as we're operating in that sort of voluntary market, it's going to be really hard for there to be any sort of mechanism that really controls what companies are doing on their own.
And I'm going to call an audible Stephanie and put you in the hot seat there too. So I'm not sure if you ever in your role get that question or if you have that conversation internally, but I'm just curious your perspective on that.
It is an interesting question. So we're offsetting our main office's carbon footprint. Our building is LEED Gold certified, and operationally, we have a lot of sustainability goals, and when we work with our clients, our primary goal is to be a resource for them in that process, and make sure that we're meeting with them early on to provide input on material selection and whatever goal that they set forward, just being a resource for them early on to help them navigate that process.
The next question we have in it's for both of you, and it's, what are your goals? And so Lindsay, maybe for the program, and Stephanie for your participation.
Sure. I mentioned earlier on that the program fits into Forterra's mission because it supports our restoration goals as an organization. So that's the overarching goal, is to essentially, provide this revenue stream to support restoration, which is often difficult to fund. In terms of more specific program goals, we'd love to continue growing the program. We'd love to have more companies, more individuals signing up. And one of the goals in recent years, this past year, 2020, was the first time that we invested a significant amount of money from the program into doing site prep at one of our Forterra owned sites. And so we'd like to continue to be able to do that and build out that aspect of the program, and also start looking at how we can support some of our partners in a deeper way. For example, we've been working on expanding our Green City partnerships in South King County in many communities that are underinvested in forest restoration, and we'd love to be able to figure out how we can financially support some of those communities, particularly communities of color that already face disproportionate impacts in terms of health due to local environment, lack of forest canopy, poor air quality. And so we'd love to be able to build in that lens of equity in terms of what sites we're investing in and support some of those communities. We'd also are looking at having a certified component of the program. Currently, it's not a certified credit that you might be able to buy in a regulatory market, but there are some recent new carbon protocols that we think Forterra can develop on our project sites, particularly in riparian areas. And so we are looking at coming up this next year, whether or not we can, in addition to providing this voluntary non-certified track that we currently offer, also providing a certified credit. So that's the direction that we're looking at going in with the program.
Thanks.
I think our goals are probably to continue engaging with Forterra. I think as the years pass, we try to find additional ways to work together. We've participated in a few of the cross-laminated timber coalition conversations, and we built the green, I don't even know, repurposed pallets to make things for your breakfast decor, I guess. And as far as Bear Creek goes, to continue that adoption and to keep adding to the green space there and protecting it, and continue covering our main office's carbon footprint, and being engaged as much as we can.
That's great. In Bear Creek, that's no small feat. That's a priority King County watershed. So times two on that answer. I'm glad to hear you say that. Lindsay, you had mentioned something. You were talking about sort of disproportionate impacts on communities of color, neighborhoods of color, on neighborhoods that maybe are of less income for its residents, and how can we partner to create more opportunities to retreat those areas. And the next question, it had already been teed up, but it's a really good segue, which is, do you believe there's a potential solution when you do that to address the threat of gentrification that brings? And maybe you can talk a little bit more about the issue and then any thoughts you might have on a potential solution for that.
Sure. I know that is a big topic for planners and for folks that are trying to expand access to open space in communities. Oftentimes when there's improved community amenities, it increases property values and has the potential to displace current residents. And there isn't an easy answer or solution to combating that. There needs to be so many different solutions. I think one of the number one solutions is to create more housing so that housing is more affordable, so that communities aren't being displaced. And in terms of, as an organization, I mentioned at the beginning that my role is also working with communities, and Forterra has dual sides to its mission in terms of supporting natural resource lands and also supporting communities. And so that is another aspect of Forterra's work in terms of trying to provide more housing for communities that are at risk of displacement. So I really think it needs to be a multi-pronged approach, and that it's not a reason to not support open space and improve forests in communities, but it is a real concern, and we need to be partnering with all sorts of organizations and agencies that are trying to address the issue from multiple angles.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would just add, there's a whole host of anti-displacement strategies that this needs to plug into, how it ties in with just the larger idea of avoiding displacement for our existing residents. Let's see here. Where are we? Lindsay, how do you select sites? And are there going to be new sites open on the east side? I'm guessing this means east side of Lake Washington as opposed to the state, but you can answer both.
Sure. So we select sites through a variety of ways. I mentioned that we have a component of the program that's a tree granting program. So every summer we issue a request for trees, an RFT, to local stewardship organizations to see who is in need of trees and which programs we can help support. And what's cool about the program is that it really leverages other organizations' efforts. A lot of organizations are able to use our tree contributions as match for their other funding sources. And so it's really allowing restoration dollars to go further than they would have otherwise. So in terms of how we select sites, there's site criteria that needs to be in place in terms of the sites need to be actively enrolled in restoration. They also need to be receiving of, we plant all native conifer trees, and so the trees need to be a good match for those sites as well. In terms of sites on the east side of the state, we're assuming that question was, we don't plant currently on the east side of the Cascade Mountains because those forests are so different. We are planting, as I mentioned, native conifer evergreen species that grow best on the west side of the mountains. That's not to say that we couldn't in the future, but currently that's where our sites are. I think I answered all the questions.
I think so. That's right. And here's a related one, which is Stephanie. Can you speak to your favorite site or your favorite planting event that you've attended?
That is a great question. I think naturally my favorite's Bear Creek Park because, like I said, it's been really rewarding to return to the park over the past 2 years and to see just how fast the trees do grow, and to be a part of protecting our trees. Like I said, we had a flood last year, and we put some cages up to protect from beavers coming. And yeah, it's a really cool park. If you haven't been, I recommend visiting. There's Bear Creek in the middle of it and lots of wildlife sightings. And yeah, I think that's my favorite.
Wonderful. Let's see, what just came up. So we mentioned the Green City Partnerships. There's 15 now, 14 cities. The founding program was the Green Seattle Partnership. And the question here for Lindsay is, are trees planted in Green Seattle Partnership included in our annual calculations for Evergreen carbon capture?
So The short answer is it depends. As a blanket statement, no, we're not just counting all of our Green Seattle Partnership trees as part of ECC. I mentioned that we have that tree granting program, and so sometimes forest stewards will apply for trees that are part of the Green Seattle Partnership. In that case, then they would be counted towards ECC, but not all Green Seattle Partnership trees are. I will also say that Green Seattle Partnership is pretty well supported by the city. And so a lot of those forest stewards get trees directly from the city. And they don't necessarily need the ECC trees because they have a free source of trees. And so, as I mentioned, it's really important for the program to be creating additionality in restoration programs. And so for that reason, we don't plant as many trees in Seattle, particularly recently. When the program first started, that wasn't the case. We had more Seattle sites, but now we are more frequently planting trees in other areas in South King County, on the east side of the lake, Snohomish County, and the Olympic Peninsula. I will also just mention that King County recently had their Million Trees challenge, and they wanted to plant 1 million trees, and I think it was like a 2 or 3 year time period. So they did achieve that goal recently. I think in this past year, they announced that they reached the goal. But part of that, reaching that goal, was counting all of the trees that were being planted in the county. And so all of the different stakeholders doing tree plantings got together with the county and figured out a reporting mechanism so that trees weren't being double counted. And that was really important. And so if trees were being counted for Green Seattle Partnership, they weren't being counted again for Evergreen carbon capture. So that's something important to note, that is being tracked at that level.
And the same would go for Stephanie was mentioning Green Redmond Partnership, so same sort of relationship there. Lindsay, does carbon capture count towards the Living Building Challenge carbon offset requirement in that certification program?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that off the top of my head. I would need to look into that. Skip, you might know, you might have better recollection than I do. I think that they require a certified offset though.
I believe that's true. And so that could be changing this next year as we, there's now a viable urban forest certified carbon credit. It's called City Forest Credits. We've been working with them for the last few years, and we're experimenting with their protocol now and how that blends in with this program. So that could potentially in the future be the case, but I think you're right. I believe Living Building Challenge requires certified credits otherwise, which typically would be large forest projects, either domestically or internationally.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes projects that aren't even forest related, a lot of certified programs are like deferred emissions from changes in agricultural practices or using different cook stoves in Africa. But yeah, those are other examples of programs that can sometimes be certified offsets.
Yeah, actually, Stephanie, you might have experience with that program in your line of business. Do you know otherwise?
We do have experience, but that would be a question for our sustainability specialist, Laura Soma. So if people have specific questions, I'd be happy to provide her contact information or get you in touch with her.
Thank you. That sounds great. I love this next question, and I have a friend who is, I almost want to think it's her submitting this just because, but there's newfound interest in employing quote unquote beavers to help with various sustainability issues. And is Forterra including beaver introduction as an example in any environmental work?
That is a really good question. That is outside of the scope of Evergreen carbon capture, but Skip does oversee a lot of our restoration work and might be able to speak better to it. Can I bounce that question back to you as the moderator? Sure,
unless Stephanie wants it. No. Yeah, the answer is we don't have any beaver reintroduction that we've led. I can say that we work quite a bit in the Snohomish Basin, and that's a topic that's been raised quite a bit there. I think they actually even have some pilot programs. We do work closely with beavers in our lands when they're there. We don't like removing beavers if they cause issues for neighbors, for example. So we work on scientifically based options that allow us to retain beavers, but also address neighbor needs if we run into conflict there. So, Lindsay, can you repeat how many trees have been planted and how much carbon they are predicted to sequester?
Sure. So since we started the program, we started planting in 2011. We've planted almost 45,000 trees. And according to our carbon protocol, we calculate that each tree will sequester 5 tons of carbon over its lifetime. So that's about 250,000 tons of carbon over the next 100 years. It is over the tree's lifetime that it's calculated. And Stephanie, do you know offhand how many trees GLY has planted?
I think we're just below the 1,200 tree mark.
Cool.
That's quite a bit. Let's see, for each of you, are there internship opportunities for high school students, either at Forterra or GLY?
At Forterra, we do have a range of different internship opportunities available. They differ every year. I don't know currently what opportunities there are, but if someone is interested specifically, I encourage you to reach out to either me personally, and I can connect you with someone at Forterra, or our general info line, because we do post internship opportunities, particularly in the summer. And recently, in the past couple of years, we've had some really focused internship endeavors where we've partnered with other organizations to try to get more youth from communities of color exposed to the environmental fields. So we've partnered with Rainier Valley Corps, is that the name of the program, Skip? And some other entities to try to get more youth of color involved. So I do encourage you to reach out if that question came from someone that was thinking that they're looking for something specifically.
My answer for GLY is very similar to Lindsay's. Our internships are typically posted to our website, typically in the summer. If there's a specific interest, I would recommend reaching out. We have an info@gly.com email, and we will get back to you.
Lindsay, you mentioned this a little bit, how we work, but do you coordinate with other regional groups that are doing similar restoration work? If so, who and where?
Sure. So we are closely coordinated with many of the local stewardship organizations that are doing work throughout this region. I mentioned we have this request for tree process. And so, there are many regional organizations or local organizations that get trees from us. You could see who all of those organizations are on our tree map. There's a field partner tab. We showed our tree map at the beginning, but it's on our Evergreen carbon capture website, and you can see all the dozens of different organizations that we've worked with. We also just try to track what's going on with carbon generally, in terms of attending regional conferences and, talking to partners and trying to stay on top of what's happening with state level policy. So there is that level of just dialogue occurring so that we know what's going on regionally.
Wonderful. Similarly, there's a specific question. Are we working with Snohomish County government this coming year?
That's a good question. So Snohomish Conservation District, which is a quasi-governmental agency in Snohomish County, they have received trees from us for many years, and we are not 100% confirmed yet for this year who our field partners are, and so I'm not sure of whether or not they requested trees. So I can't speak to that. In terms of other ways, Forterra does work in Snohomish County a fair amount, and we coordinate a lot of efforts, particularly around land conservation and riparian restoration with Snohomish County, and so that work is happening parallel and separate from the Evergreen carbon capture work.
Yeah, I can also add to that, which is I mentioned, or Lindsay mentioned, that we're working on a certified carbon pilot project, and where we're exploring that is in Snohomish County, and it's in partnership with Snohomish County government. So we will be operating to that end. It's not yet part of the program, but hopefully that will let us make that merge of certified carbon credits. Lindsay, of the 45,000 trees planted, how many survived and are replaced when the estimated carbon capture volume for 100 years is up? So I think, let's see, how many of those are survived or replaced, need to be replaced?
That's a good question. I don't know offhand how many have survived up till now. So we monitor the trees at 3-year mark, and if they have fallen below 50% survivability, we replace them to bring them back up to that threshold. For the most part, most tree mortality is going to happen in those first few years. We plant trees that are already about 2 years old. They're saplings. And so most trees that aren't going to make it die off in that first year that they're planted is when they're at the biggest risk of shock and drought. And so most of the tree, based on the science, most of the tree mortality would happen in those first few years. There is the potential, obviously, for things to happen and trees to die beyond those 3 years, especially when you're looking at a 100-year time frame, which is why we've built in so much of a contingency factor. The calculator that we've used actually factors in that the average evergreen tree is going to sequester 13.9 tons of carbon over its 100-year lifetime. And due to those variations in survivability, we calculate each tree will sequester 5 tons. So we're planting almost 3 times as many trees as we need to, and we're not claiming that higher number of carbon either. And then on top of that, we also have the 50% survivability. So there's a lot of contingency rates built in there so that we can guarantee that the carbon that we're guaranteeing is being sequestered actually is. I was also recently asked about forest fires and whether or not any of the trees that we've planted over the years have been impacted. And so that's something that we're looking at incorporating into our monitoring, particularly since now we're seeing fires happening on the peninsula and in Pierce County, when previously we were historically seeing more fires on the east side of the mountains where we didn't have sites. We are starting to think about how we can assess whether or not our trees that are on the west side are being impacted and figuring out whether or not we need to modify our monitoring around that. So that's a conversation we're having currently.
Okay, so we're coming up on time. So I have one last question for both of you, and it relates to, at the outset, we saw that there was some interest in learning more about the online carbon calculator in our Slido poll, but we haven't really touched on it too much. So Lindsay, could you just run through the calculator that we have and explain a little bit more about it?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we host a calculator on our website. The calculator is produced by University of California, Berkeley, their Cool Climate program. And they figure out all the data and assumptions driving how much carbon equivalencies are factored in here. And what I like about this calculator is that it provides averages. So you can see there that this is the calculator for individuals, and you can see that based on the average household size and income, the average household will emit just under 50 tons of carbon per year. And then if you do have specific information, you can change the number of people in your house. You can adjust your annual income. This is anonymous. We don't collect any of this information if you do want to play around with it. And then you can even go to each of the tabs and see what your footprint from each of your scopes would be. So you can see travel. If you're flying, you could enter exactly how many miles you've flown this year. You can even do the advanced version and click on whether or not you flew short flights or long flights. And you can really start to customize this and see how, if you have one vehicle that does gasoline or diesel versus 2 vehicles, if you're taking public transit, what your impact is. And then you can see on the lower right-hand side, the component of travel that contributes to that overall carbon footprint. And then you can also go over to the next tab and you can start looking at your housing and look at what the impact is of your electricity consumption, of your natural gas consumption, of your water consumption. One of the things that I think is most interesting on this is the next tab, which is food, because a huge component of our carbon footprint is what we eat. And you can start seeing if you're eating a lot of meat, how that impacts your carbon footprint versus if you maybe decide to go vegetarian even 5 days a week, what sort of impact that will have on your carbon footprint. I think I saw a statistic recently that if you eat meat for if you reduce your amount of meat production by just 1 day, you can lower your carbon footprint by like 8 pounds per week. So it's over 1 ton of carbon per year by just reducing, meat and dairy for the majority of the week. So there's a lot of ways that you can actually start seeing, what your individual actions are, how they're stacking up, how they're contributing to your overall carbon footprint. So maybe I'm just a dork, but I think it's really fun to dig around in this. And then we also try to make it really easy to participate. So if you play around with it and then you do want to go ahead and offset your carbon footprint, on the right-hand side here, the tons, you can populate the tons of carbon you want to offset, and then you can see that the rate is $7.50 per ton, and then you can go ahead and contribute. I also mentioned there's a business calculator. If businesses want to participate, they can play around with the calculator, they can input their data, and then they can contact me if they want to sign up. We ask that companies work with us directly and do a contracting process.
Okay, and on that note, one last question, Stephanie, is how does GLY use the calculator? Do you find it functional? How do you approach this work?
Yeah, so in addition to using the calculator, like Lindsay just mentioned, to calculate our main office's carbon footprint for our ECC trees, we did an internal challenge in 2018 because we found the calculator to be fun and easy, like Lindsay mentioned. So we posted a challenge to have people calculate their household carbon footprint. And I think we had about 40 employees participate, and we tabulated the results, made an infographic, and made some recommendations for improvements that everybody could make to reduce that number. And the intention is to repeat this exercise next year to compare to see if, as a company, we've improved our numbers.
Wonderful. So I see we're right at time, so I will cut us off here. I want to thank everybody for participating. If you have more questions or want to seek more information, we shared the contact information earlier. Hopefully you have it. Otherwise, you can find us at Forterra or GLY websites. And just as a last note, I mentioned at the top that we're recording this, and the recording will be available on our event page if you'd like to share it or revisit. So thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you, Stephanie and Lindsay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.